Hi, welcome back to Super Sons. This week, it's actually just me. Jake is technically at work because time zones are complicated. I'm joined by Ram V, who is currently writing Justice League Dark and is taking over the reins for Catwoman. Ram, how are you?
Yeah, not bad. As good as can be expected, given the atrocious circumstances that we find ourselves in with the world. But otherwise, hanging in there.
It's been a long couple of months, but hope the world gets better
Yeah.
as it goes because people are doing the right things. So, I'm actually a hard-hitting journalist. So the first question is always the question that catches people off guard, and they're like, "Oh no, what is the answer?" So, what's your favorite sandwich?
My favorite sandwich is it's a very specific sandwich. It's a Reuben, but it's the house special Reuben that you get at Eisenberg's Deli in New York by the Flatiron Building. As the first time I was in New York for the convention, um, Alex Packnadel, who's a writer who's part of the White Noise Studio that I'm part of, said I had to go have this sandwich at Eisenberg's, which is a century-old traditional deli in New York, and so we went there and we had that. And every time I go back to New York, it's a thing now. It's a thing we do, and it is a very, very good sandwich.
Is there anything like unique about this Reuben, or it's just like a really good Reuben?
It's a really good Reuben, but also it's the kind of Reuben that if you have it, you really are not going to be hungry for the rest of the day. It's kind of we'll see how much we can fit between two slices of bread, Reuben.
There's a place like that in Philly, in the market, and it's just like this. If I ever got it for lunch, it was like I'm ready to just like crawl under my desk and take a nap. So
Yeah.
I feel
Yeah, yeah. My food experience is so I worked in Philly for about 8 years. I mean, I studied and worked there for a while, and my food experiences in Philly involved the now famous Philly cheesesteak, of course, but also a version of it called the Philly pizza steak.
Oh, on South Street.
Well, no, it was. This wasn't on South Street. This was at a place where the place where I worked. Everyone there used to go in for like a Christmas lunch and dinner, etc. And that's where I first had it, and I just couldn't wrap my head around the idea of someone putting a pizza inside slices of bread.
So the pizza is inside the cheesesteak?
Yes,
Huh.
there's instead of just slices of beef, it's got slices of pizza in there.
That is in. So what I thought you were talking about is the Philly taco, where you get the really big slice of pizza and then you wrap it around the cheesesteak.
No, no, no. This one is like slices of pizza put inside like slices of beef at a cheesesteak. Oh, too much.
I'm gonna have to wait until everything opens back up and go find this thing because that sounds
Like a monster.
yeah. I mean that's pretty much what I want to describe my food as a monstrosity. So everyone's kind of got their own origin story with comics, but what was your like specific gateway into DC? Is there any particular character that you attached to when you started reading comics or watching the shows?
So when I was a kid, I didn't get a lot of DC Marvel comics back in India. I grew up in India. And so I was predominantly reading stuff like Mandrake, Phantom, Flash Gordon. So if you're gonna go childhood nostalgia, I probably am more attached to those characters, really.
Mm-hmm.
But my gateway into DC was really when I was 20 or so. I was in the States. I was in Philly, and a friend of mine gifted me the first volume of Sandman, and that really pulled me in. And obviously, I knew of all these other characters making guest appearances in Sandman. You know, there's an issue with Batman in there. And so it was really kind of my first, look in at a comic that felt like it was doing something interesting, that was engaging me even as a 20-year-old at that point. And that's kind of the first time I started thinking about comics as a medium where you could do interesting things with literature and visuals. And I really sort of went down a Vertigo rabbit hole, if you will. I read everything Gaiman had done, then I read everything Alan Moore had done, then I followed that to Grant Morrison, Ennis, Ellis, and so really it wasn't a character that was a gateway for me. It was more that era of books and those creators. And when I first started writing, I remember talking to a friend about it, and he said, what would you consider as a marker of success in comics for you? And I said, I want to be one of those guys who were on that roster of people who wrote Hellblazer, right? Like if you go back and look at the Hellblazer series,
yeah,
every writer that I would look at and go like, okay, this is someone whose work I can really respect, has written Hellblazer at some point. And so it was also the month they canceled the main Hellblazer series, so
you got it at a great time.
Yeah, but I mean, funnily, here I am a few years later, and I got to write Constantine for JLD, and I'm getting my opportunity to play with all of those characters. So
yeah, that actually kind of gives me more like understanding of how you wrote Constantine for JLD, because I was like, wow, this feels a lot more Vertigo. The story felt a lot more Vertigo-y than it felt mainline DC, so that's really interesting to know.
I mean, yeah, my influence coming into comics is very much via that Vertigo vibe, and those are very much the kind of comics that I like to read and write. Although I think things have moved past an era where that kind of comic was coming out, and if I just did a Vertigo comic now, it would be like me writing something that belonged 20 years ago. So while I love Vertigo and while I love all those stories, I'm trying to do something that's uniquely me.
Yeah. Not to toot your horn for you, but you absolutely are. You have a very unique voice in all of these books.
Thank you.
So, getting on to your next big DC story, you actually wrote a short in the Catwoman's 80th. It kind of felt like a slice of life with Selena Kyle, where she was doing that road trip.
Sure.
And
yeah.
Where did that idea for the road trip come from?
Well, it was kind of nested in the brief, really. When Jessica Chen, who's the editor on the book, got in touch with me, she said, "Look, I want you," and we'd already discussed me taking over Catwoman and writing from 25 onward. So she said, "Look, Joel's run ends with this issue, and I want you to do a story in the 80th anniversary special, which kind of connects the end of Joel's run to the beginning of yours." And I knew that I was starting my run in Gotham, so I said, "Okay, well, why don't I just literally do that, connect the end of Joel's run where Maggie and Selena are heading out in a car, and take that and say, okay, how do they get to Gotham?" And so the road trip idea came from there. And once I knew I was going to make it a road trip, I was like, it made sense to do it in a kind of Kerouac on the road style rather than because I don't want to do something expected, right? When I'm writing in an anthology, don't get me wrong, I love everyone else's stories and takes, but I always want to try and do something that feels different to all the other stories in there. I always want to take that doesn't feel like it's just another adventure, and so that's what I try to do with the anthologies, especially because they're also so short. They're just 8 pages. So you might as well do something interesting and strange and weird.
So being that you want to tell different types of stories than everything else that's going on, what do you think makes sort of like an essential element to a Catwoman story? What do you want to take into like your chunk of Catwoman?
Yeah, I mean, I think as a general thing, if you ask what is essential to a Catwoman story, it's a very open-ended question, in that it's very difficult to answer that, because I think good writers take the character and they fundamentally change them. So it's not like there's an essential element to the story. It's that there are essential elements to your take on the character, right? And so if you ask me that, what are the essential elements of my take on Catwoman? Mm-hmm. I really enjoy the fact that she is just a straight up street level criminal. And I feel like a lot of stories, eventually, given where we are now, kind of move away from that. And I would very much like to, at least in one aspect, take the stories back to that, where, hey, she knows the streets better than anyone else, and hey, she's a thief. She's so incredibly accomplished a thief that you could put her in 10 different heists, and each one harder and more impossible than the previous, and she will still pull it off. And that's the kind of story that I want to tell with Selina Kyle, in terms of the framework and the structure of it, and what we're looking at. In terms of the character development aspect of it, I really want to see Catwoman be defined as Catwoman, and not as a Batman villain or a Batman love interest or a Batman rogues gallery character, mm-hmm. And I think obviously a lot of that already has been done, but I don't think we've seen the character significantly progress from that standpoint. Mm-hmm. And so hopefully with this run, we'll kind of give her more agency in the world of Gotham, if you will.
I love to hear that, because that's such an interesting way to move forward. So it'll be more like street level stories rather than versing like world ending bad guys.
Yeah, and I think there's a natural inclination from my point of view, my voice, to do more grounded stories rather than I always joke about this. I'm like, look, once you start Dragon Ball Zing, then you inevitably end up with like, okay, and then he punches a planet, and then she punches a planet, and so I don't want to end up there. I think it's more interesting to hang around that sort of street level aesthetic and push the story in terms of character, mm-hmm. rather than push it in terms of conflict.
Yeah, I think that does allow you to introduce a lot more character elements and moments, because you are not dealing with those planet punching threats. So
yeah, I mean, it's difficult to kind of get people to care about the hardships of trying to rebuild a relationship with your sister when something is trying to eat the planet. Mm-hmm. So I think it's a matter of balance in terms of how bombastic and large your conflicts are versus how intimate your character moments are. Yeah.
That sounds awesome. One of my all-time like favorite styles of story is the Sandman Mystery Theaters. Mm-hmm. So getting a little bit more of the ground level hero / villain work is so much more alluring to me than like the big Joker type stories. So
yeah, and I mean, I think there's a place for both styles, but it's just my style tends to be more grounded in this particular case. I'm certainly inclined to tell cosmic weird stories with other characters, but I feel like there's a lot more to be done with Selina on that ground level.
So, to step off of like a direct character thing, do you like to listen to music while you work, or like what's your process?
Yeah, I just posted about it on Twitter as well. I love having like peripheral input all the time. So I usually listen to a lot of music while I work. And now I've got this little tiny projector, really cheap one that I got off of Amazon. And I'm now projecting like video loops through my office so that no matter where I look, I'm like, okay, there's something visual going on. There's something interesting that my eyes and my ears are taking in while I write. So
Yeah, I saw that. It's a very interesting aesthetic to your desk.
yeah.
I like that. So with like more ground level stuff, is there any characters you hope to utilize more in Gotham? Like people who may be lesser known or underutilized? Or are you trying to work with your own cast?
To an extent, I'm introducing a few new characters, but also I like the idea of taking on characters, and these are not. I don't necessarily go by like lesser used or more obscure, but characters who I feel like I have a take on them that hasn't been done before, and that's an interesting take. And so if I have a take on one of the more obscure characters that I feel like, okay, this hasn't been done before with XYZ, and so I would like to do that. I would like to take that character. Then I'll go to my editors and go, hey, can I use this character? And 9 times out of 10, my editors will go, no, you're not doing that. But every once in a while, your editors say, hey, that character hasn't been seen in a few years, and it'd be cool. I don't think he's being used anywhere, or she's being used anywhere. And yeah, so you'll definitely see some characters that haven't been seen for a while, but you'll see them, I guess, with my take on them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
that's a very interesting answer. So are there any type of like positive trends in the comics themselves or in the comics world that you want to see more of? Just like trends or anything like that you want?
I mean, there are lots of positive trends. I think storytelling is constantly evolving. But I also feel like these past few years, we've been seeing more unique voices come into comics, like Ice Cream Man, for example, such a unique voice for Maxwell Prince. Infidel by Pornsak Pichetshote was also a very authentically written book. And so I am very interested in seeing more unique voices come into comics, which was really the case with the kind of books that brought me into comics that we were discussing. Mm-hmm. And then somewhere between then and now, we kind of turned into this idea of like, okay, this is what works, and so we're all going to get people who make this kind of story or tell this kind of story. What that does is kind of you end up with the same kind of story being told each time, and your only recourse becomes to amp up the stakes each time you go and tell a story, because I mean, Star Wars is Star Wars, right? And you go in each time you do something different, you're just amping up the stakes, but the fundamental underlying story remains the same. And I think that needs to change. That has to change. And I think I think people from different backgrounds and different voices and different cultures and ideologies are having more access to make comics. And when you get people from different cultures making comics and telling stories, you are likely to get more different stories being told.
Yeah, like, for example, your Savage Shores, it's a vampire story, but like it's a vampire story from a perspective that I haven't been able to read yet.
Yeah.
So being able to tell like a quote unquote Star Wars or a werewolf or something like that, but telling it from all these different POVs and things like that from different experiences is what makes comics like booming right now. And that's such a good thing, because it gives you so many different stories to like fall in
Yeah,
love with.
and you realize that the greater joy is not in the familiarity of what you're reading, but rather in the ability to look at what is familiar to you through someone else's eyes. And that's always the interesting part of stories, is that you get someone else's point of view.
Mhm.
So I read somewhere, a quote about writing where someone had said a writer's job is to take the familiar and present it in an unfamiliar way, which I think is a really beautiful way to describe what you do as someone who writes fiction. And so the more unfamiliar points of view we get into comics, the more likely we are to get more interesting stories.
Yeah, so that actually leads into my next question, which I've been super excited to ask you about. So it's about your Black Adam Christmas story from the anthology of last year, and that is a very different perspective on the Santa Claus story using Black Adam.
Yeah.
Was that your idea, or how did that come about? Because once I read that, I was like, wow.
Yeah, that was definitely my idea. I think when I pitched it to the editors, they were like, "This is great. Also, you should be really careful writing this." But no, I mean, it draws from. I think part of the reason I get away with doing what I do in that story is because it comes from a place of innocence. I'm not trying to make some kind of statement. I'm just trying to tell you a good story. But it comes from a place of innocence for me, because when I grew up in India, I grew up in a Hindu family, and so we never celebrated Christmas, and so Christmas was always this kind of thing that I was familiar with, because I would read stories of Santa Claus going around delivering gifts, but I would always wonder, like, how come my house got skipped over? Does he know that I don't celebrate Christmas? Like, what's going on? And so it wasn't until I was older, of course, that I realized what it was, but I just wanted to tap into that feeling of, like, how come I don't get any gifts? How come I don't get people coming over to my house and celebrating this thing with me? And all these stories that I was obviously reading and looking at on TV, but not getting to experience, right? So I said, okay, cool. Let's take that and let's put that in with the Black Adam story, because Black Adam's obviously the kind of guy who'd go like, I will fix this for you by force. So that's where that story came from.
That's so. I didn't even think of it that way, just because I have my own point of view, but getting to understand from other perspectives is so interesting, because that story is, wow, it kind of gives me more insight, especially something that is so normal to me as Christmas and Santa, like the whole idea of Santa, but knowing that other cultures and places don't have those experiences, but they can see them.
Exactly.
Getting to kind of work through what that's like.
Exactly. And I just wanted to sort of transmit that sort of innocence of going, of what Christmas really is, but also the funny aspect of someone who obviously doesn't recognize that this is a festival or a religious holiday, if you will, and just takes everything literally and goes like, of course this guy sounds like a wizard. I've met wizards in the past. I'll go and show him a thing or two. So
I really dig Black Adam. I want to say it's in World War III, where he just kind of does the Three Stooges eye poke to Psycho Pirate.
Right.
He puts it through his head.
Right.
Such an interesting character. So, along with Catwoman, you are handling Justice League Dark.
Yeah.
How do you kind of differentiate? How do you differentiate?
Yeah.
Thank you. I would never have gotten it. So, how do you do that for each of your different stories? So, if Catwoman's like a low-level crime story, how do you balance that with a horror?
Yeah, I mean, I guess my job here was made a little bit easy because I was taken over from James's run, and James already has a set aesthetic to that story, and I'm just carrying that forward, which is this kind of horror, but horror tinged with epic dark fantasy, if you will, right? And so I've tried to stay true to that aesthetic because I didn't feel it would be right for me to come in for the, final couple of arcs and go like, yeah, I'm totally changing everything around. And so I wanted to ensure that that story was told, and I get to tie up the threads that James originally introduced when he was writing the early part of the story. And so I get to do that. Post that, potentially starting next year, I get to do an entire new arc, new story, and with that, I suppose you'll start seeing more of my aesthetic come true. Which my take on Justice League Dark is Justice League Dark should be the place for all the weirdest DC stuff, right? Because you get room for your epic, fantastic battles in other team books. You get that with the main Justice League book as well. So I guess I was talking to the editors and I was asking the questions to like, okay, why does this book exist? Because it has a different team. And how are they different? And they're different because they come from that corner of the DCU where all the weird things lie. And so I want to really try and push that aesthetic of just absurdity and craziness as part of the aesthetic that drives the book. Yeah,
it's got a very different take on the DCU, and having that, being able to explore that corner again was awesome because kind of like after the New 52, all of those books kind of went away. And when I saw you were on the book, the first thing that I had like a meltdown about with excitement is Animal Man.
Yeah,
because we hadn't seen him since all the bad stuff happened to him in the Lemire run. So was that your call to bring him in? Is there any?
I mean, to be honest, it was already James's call to bring him in because I was brought in to that arc and to that issue when James already had sort of a background idea set out for what he wanted to do with those. So James came in and said, look, this was my idea. I was going to bring in Animal Man. I was going to have all of this stuff happen. But obviously, I'm going to go write Batman now. So
see ya.
Given that, do you want to tell this story? And I said, yeah, I do. And I think I hope it was the right choice on my part to go, yeah, I'm going to continue to tell the story that James started. And so I love that he asked me to bring Animal Man in. There were a couple of other characters that he suggested, which didn't eventually happen. But no, I had a blast writing Animal Man. Where else can you have a superhero like enter his own gut?
So I don't know if you're even allowed to say, but are there any characters you're excited to be able to bring into the Dark Team?
Yes, but I'm not allowed to say which characters they are. So
got it. I think what is it like writing Wonder Woman in a team like that? Just because when it first got announced, it felt a little off to me to put her in there, but coming to it, she kind of says in the first issue, she's like, I do magic too, guys. And having that big gun in that book is so interesting. Seeing her interact with like Man-Bat, which I never expected to love as much as I did.
Right. Yeah. I think again, that vision for that take comes from James, and he made my life easy because he already set all of that up, and I'm just following that. And I think it's a very interesting take. To be honest, Wonder Woman's always had this element of, being involved mythologically with Greco-Roman mythology. And so if that's the case, then of course she does magic. And so it was really a matter of pushing into that corner of her origin and seeing what you could mine from there. And I'm a huge fan of world mythologies and how they crisscross and connect with each other. So, I mean, not that I got to do that with the issues that I had, but I can totally see why Wonder Woman would work as a magical, mythological character. Yeah.
So, with some of your writing, you have a lot of like horror and mythical elements.
Mm-hmm.
What would you kind of chalk up your influences to? Like what inspires you for those types of stories?
I read pretty widely, to be honest, and so it'd be very hard for me to point out one thing that I would say, okay, this is my horror aesthetic. Mm-hmm. It's not. I don't have like one particular thing. Like there are people who are obsessed with body horror, or there are people who are obsessed with cosmic horror and Lovecraft. I'm not. I guess the only thing that really influences the way I think about horror is, I think this is a John Carpenter quote where he said, the key to good horror is to trick people into scaring themselves and not try to scare people directly. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah. Huh.
Yeah, I think that's a really cool take. Like the things that are truly scary to you are scary to you because you consider them, not because I presented them to you on a screen.
Yeah. It makes sense. Like some people are scared by like the body horror, the cosmic horror, mm-hmm. but it's mm-hmm. more based on what you're afraid of.
Yeah, and even with the body horror, like if I just showed you gore, it's different from doing that versus say something like The Fly, right? Mm-hmm. And The Fly, yes, there's body horror there, but it's not just gore. It's not just disgusting stuff being presented to you. It's scary because that movie lets you put yourself in the place of a character who is undergoing this change while he's trying to do very human things like impress this person that he is in love with, or be successful as a scientist and show that he is worthy of someone's adulation and respect, Mm-hmm. And so all of those things factor in. And so really what you're scared of is, oh my God, what is this person doing to themselves just so they can have better self-esteem, right?
Yeah.
And so that's the aspect that I think is at the heart of that story. And similarly, if you ask me to look at The Thing, there's a different kind of fear, the fear that I can... In my isolation, I don't really know who I am trapped with. Any of these people could be a thing that I don't understand, which is such a human concern and fear.
Yeah.
And I think at least if I approach horror stories like that, I'm likely to tell more interesting stories. So that's my take on horror. Huh. That said, I do really like Ligotti and Clive Barker and John Carpenter as horror aesthetics. Yeah,
we got to see John Carpenter this summer, and I'll tell you that story after mm-hmm. the interview. But yeah, I think what you're saying is like kind of like the human element and the underlying themes of horror are what make things scary, because it all depends on what you can cling on to and what you are afraid of in the night.
Yeah. And it's also, well, it's not the special effects. It's not how good your artist is in drawing, a pus-filled oozing creature. It's about how you tell that story that is more effective. I mean, the reason Lovecraft is so effective is his language and his method of presenting his ideas is just as potent as his ideas. So,
because it's easier to kind of be afraid when you connect with a character rather than just like, oh, look, this person's head pops off.
Yeah, exactly.
So I think that does show through in your horror writing that I've gotten to read so far, is those human elements. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was a great answer.
I think about horror way too much. and I have these discussions because, again, I'm part of the studio here in London with writer Dan Waters as well, who's part of the studio. And Dan is such a horror buff. Like, he wrote Lucifer and he's done Coffin Bound. Yeah, and they all have like massive horror elements and tendencies to them. And so the more you converse with someone who shares an interest but a different point of view with horror, the more you tend to sharpen your own ideas and thoughts about it. So,
And I know your collective. Do you guys share the same like office space too?
I mean, not really. I would not be able to write if I had to share office space with someone else. But no, I think we share a collaborative aspect to getting better at our craft. In that, I mean, it's not really viable to do it now, but most of my scripts, when they go out to editors, they've been seen by 3 other people whose editing and storytelling skills I have massive respect for. So I think a story that has been through an objective ringer of craft is a better crafted story, obviously, than something that you write and you maybe do a second draft and send off. So I think it helps to have people who approach storytelling as a craft look at your work.
And collaboration and things like that, and getting more eyes is always something that can improve.
Yeah, especially getting more eyes from people that you admire, that you can respect. Yeah,
and like their So, we always like to ask this question: Is there anything that you wish more people would ask you about that you love to talk about that you don't really get a chance to?
I mean, not really. I generally am very talkative and I talk about a lot, but I do it over the pub or with with these guys in collaboration. So I'm generally pretty open about talking about anything that people want to talk about on a podcast or an interview. So I don't really have something that no one's asked me about it and I want to talk about it.
I assume you've probably not gotten our last question. If you had to make your own Rube Goldberg machine, what would its purpose be?
I thought about this a little bit, and I would say I would make a Rube Goldberg machine that made another Rube Goldberg machine. And the idea would be to achieve pointless singularity, where there's just machines building other machines that are just building other machines, and there is no purpose to it. It's just this giant, beautiful
like
experiment of causality.
It's just a marble always going around your house.
Yeah, but can you imagine that taken to infinity? Like a machine that has built another machine that has built another machine. And you all you have to do is start it off with a marble, and then you've built a universe where a marble is accelerating through at incredible speeds while the act of creation just continues infinitely. That's amazing. I should write a comic about that.
Yeah, because the visuals on that, like, wow. Another answer that I never thought I would get. And that's, so I co-host with my brother, and that's his question.
Right.
I can't wait for him to hear that, because it's going to blow his mind. So
yeah, I mean, the reason I came to that was the defining characteristic of a Rube Goldberg machine is to do non-essential tasks in very complicated ways, right? And so the original definition of science fiction definition of when the machines will take over was in a document where it was called the essential singularity. So I imagine this is like the pointless version of that, the non-essential singularity.
Wow. I did not expect to have that conversation today about singularity, but a Rube Goldberg machine.
Yes.
Forever.
Yes. This is great. This is the future of humanity.
Nothing else matters. Only Rube Goldberg.
Yeah, of course nothing else matters. It's the ultimate denial of existential purpose. It's great.
It's the best art project ever. So that's all the questions I have. Very thankful that you came on to talk. Do you have
Yeah.
any other projects coming up or anything you want to plug? And where can we find you?
Yeah, I mean, you can find me mostly on Twitter. I'm most active there. My Twitter handle is the right Ram, as opposed to the wrong one. And my Instagram handle is RamVWrites, I think. But I'm not as active there. As far as upcoming projects, I do have a few things on the go. Obviously, I'm writing Catwoman and Justice League Dark still, so that continues. And I'm also working on otherwise unspoken plans at DC, so I would urge people to keep an eye out for those. Apart from that, I am, I've got an image book coming out later this year called Blue and Green, which is a jazz noir horror graphic novel with Anand Radhakrishnan, which I'm very excited about. I've got also another Vault book that we'll start work on toward the end of the year, called Radio Apocalypse. It's already been announced, but not officially. And so quite excited about that. And I'm also working on a couple of other creator-owned projects with other publishers, which I will talk about on Twitter, so everyone should tune in. So
sounds like you've got a lot coming.
Yeah. I have no ability to actually discern how much work I can do in a year, and so I guess this is my year to learn. So
hey, you got a lot of time to do it. So thank you for joining us. You can catch us on Twitter at DC Super Sons, on Instagram at Super Sons Pod, and we will catch you in 2 weeks. Same bat time, same bat channel.